But in the midst of all of that, some very hard work to be done, not just, of course, the rescue and salvage operations underway, but clearly the investigation. Now, through this process, a number of rumors, pieces of speculation, indications of where the investigation is going. Canada has been a big part of the speculation. We've heard a lot on that front, but we've also heard from Minister Collacott, as well as Lawrence Macaulay, as well as the Prime Minister, speaking to that, about the suspicion that some of the people responsible for the hijacking came through Canada to get into the United States. We are being told, especially today, again and again, that there's no evidence to suggest that. Indeed, we understand now that the investigation is now turning to different locations, specifically the Bahamas and London. So really way too early to say where this is going to lead us. But of course, the question about Canada's borders and the security of our borders with the U.S. Has been a big topic of conversation, particularly since Ahmed Razam and the Millennium Plot that investigators uncovered as he crossed the border by ferry going from Victoria into Washington State. Now, Martin Collacott can talk about why this continues to be a source of very great concern. He is a former head of counter-terrorism policy for the Department of Foreign Affairs, and he joins us from Vancouver. Martin Collacott, it would seem as if the focus on Canada is receding somewhat. We've heard from the Prime Minister and the Solicitor General both saying that there's no evidence linking Canada to these attacks, and indeed it sounds as if the focus has now moved to the Bahamas and London. So I'd just like to start with your comment on, I guess you have to look everywhere, don't you, right at the beginning?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the Americans have to do a lot of homework here. There is still a concern, though, with respect to Canada, even if none of these particular people who perpetrated these crimes happen to have a Canadian connection. There is no question that there are some major Canadian connections that are out there and worrying people. 3 years ago, the head of CSIS, Ward Elcock, made a very strong statement to a special committee of the Senate. He said that there were 50 international terrorist organizations operating in Canada. We were second only in the world to the United States, which is, 10 times as many people, 10 times the economy. So we've got to work hard to come second in the international terrorist sweepstakes. He also made the point that we were getting close to where we might describe as an unofficial state sponsor of terrorism. He identified the immigration and refugee systems in Canada as the main reason why, as one of the main reasons why this was taking place. And he also said the biggest single threat was Islamic terrorism. That was underlined when a Islamic terrorist called Ahmed Razam was caught trying to take explosives to the United States, crossing from Victoria to Washington State. Mm-hmm. And at his trial, all sorts of things emerged about the ease with which he got into Canada through the refugee system, had been able to stay here even though he turned down, fraudulently got a passport, went back to Afghanistan for terrorist training, and also that there was quite a wide network of people operating fairly freely in Canada, some of whom are refugees, some of whom had been turned down as refugees but not deported, many of whom had been identified as terrorist-connected people.
So given that, and given that knowledge, when the Prime Minister was asked today about what kind of change he might consider in terms of immigration policy, or any other kind of security policies, he seemed to indicate that that everything would continue as it is. So I'm a bit confused. If he knows that, then why doesn't it get addressed?
Well, he's known that for a long time. When Razam was captured, the Americans knew right away the very serious possible implications. What was our response? The Americans, by the way, then convened a congressional committee almost immediately, at which I and some other Canadians testified, and senior American political people testified. Dianne Feinstein, Senator Feinstein of California said that we were weak on controlling terrorism in Canada and identified immigration policies. The Prime Minister's response was, when Ahmed Rassam was captured, and the Americans shut down all the Millennium celebration they had planned in Seattle, he said, Canadians don't need to worry about terrorism. Well, in a sense, he was right. We're not the targets. The targets of the Islamic terrorists is almost always the United States. We have other groups like the Tamil Tigers who are basically concentrating on fundraising to wage terrorism back in Sri Lanka. And these people are still allowed to function pretty freely. So we're going to hear a lot from the Americans, even if there's no Canadian connection in this case. We're going to hear a lot from them, and our immigration and refugee policies are one of the chief sources of the problem.
Okay, and so do you believe that the pressure is going to be real and concerted to go ahead, because we're hearing this suggestion as well, that what we need is essentially a North American immigration policy, number one, and number two, a North American security policy in terms of what kind of security we have in all kinds of places, most notably, obviously, airports?
I think there's going to be a lot of talk about that. We can expect a lot of representations, and very, very strong representations from the United States. We have new immigration legislation which has passed the House of Commons. It goes to the Senate this fall. It, if anything, in my view, makes the situation worse than it was before. There is a bit of minor tinkering around the edge to try and do more security checks on refugees, but our whole refugee system is very badly organized and attracts people like this, and unless we get at the fundamentals, the situation will continue. And I think after the events of this week, the Americans just will not accept that.
Martin Collacott, always interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kathleen.
You are watching the CBC's ongoing coverage of attack on the USA on CBC Newsworld and News.